The other thing is I'm recording this session as well for future delectation. If you do not wish to be seen, if you want to by Interpol, then turn off your cameras now, but otherwise it's all good. Okay, well, I think most of us are here, so we might as well start with this really exciting in conservation with. I've been looking forward to this one for some time. It's with Kabir Kaul. Hello, Kabir.
Hi, David. How are you?
It's all very good. I'm very well, thank you very much. For those who are unfamiliar with Kabir, I'll just briefly give you a rundown as to what he is about. I mean, he's 14 years old, you know, and at 14, he's a conservationist, a wildlife writer. He's a passionate advocate for London's biodiversity. He works with a number of nature organisations, which we'll talk about shortly. And he's also, I think one of the things that really brought him to the attention of the masses is his interactive map he constructed, which took a couple of years, didn't it, to make?
About 18 months, so
yeah.
1.5 years.
Yeah, so basically it took him some time to put together. So at 14, that's quite, I mean, I haven't finished even, you know, reading some of the stuff that you've done and intend to do, but that's quite a list of things for a 14-year-old. I mean, any 14-year-old would be quite, you know, jealous of that list. I mean, I at 14 didn't have all that stuff going on at all, none of it at all. So firstly, when are you 15?
Pardon?
When are you 15?
Oh, next week. Next week.
Oh, we should have done this next week. Well, happy birthday for next week. You say you're a bird, a conservationist, wildlife writer. Where can we find any examples of your writing?
So when you go onto my blog, I've got a bibliography on the site, and those are all the articles there that are available online.
Good. Okay. And what sort of stuff have you written about?
Mainly written for the RSPB. That's not online as such, but I write for RSPB Wingbeat, which is the young people's magazine of the RSPB. And I've been interviewed as well in various nature publications and also the Evening Standard. I've got a little mention in there once. Time Out London, I wrote an article there. So it's all there, and also in The Guardian, I've written something. So that's all in my bibliography on my blog. It's on the right-hand side in the kind of sidebar. Fantastic.
And in terms of the organisations that you work with, let's talk about that now. You mentioned the RSPB. What exactly is your role with the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds?
So I'm a youth council member for the RSPB. The youth council kind of represents the youth membership. So those who are involved in the Phoenix membership, those who read the Wingbeat magazine. And in the Wingbeat magazine, you get all these opportunities to enter competitions for the RSPB, and every year there is an election held for a new council member. These council members, that's how I became a member, because the membership elects a new council member out of the people who are standing in this election. So that's how I got how I became a council member. But each council member has a slightly different role. So one may manage social media affairs. My job in particular is to improve relations between the RSPB and other organisations. For example, other trusts working with young people and other conservation groups through, for example, talks or blogs or articles, meeting other people on behalf of the RSPB. And it's a really exciting role. You get to meet other young people who all have similar interests, they're all like-minded. You go to all these different RSPB nature reserves. And it's really, really exciting because you get to see a wide range of habitats across the UK and give yourself a broader perspective of the biodiversity you find here in the UK. And it's a really, really exciting role.
It certainly sounds it. To visit a lot of RSPB reserves sounds like heaven. I mean, they have so many. How many are you going to start like a stamp collection of all the RSPB reserves?
No, but I collect pin badges from whichever visitor center I visit. I'm a huge pin badge collector.
Are you going to be like Bill Oddie wearing his pin badges on his hat and his jackets?
I did once for about 4 or 5 years, but then I got worried they'd get lost, so I just decided to create a massive collection of them at home instead.
I used to collect pin badges too, and I had them pinned all over my telescope cover, which was great. It was quite distinctive, but unfortunately, 2 years ago, I had my telescope stolen. Someone broke into the car, and it broke my heart because, I mean, I was losing them anyway, generally, but to lose the whole telescope along the pin, I was more upset about the pin badges than I was actually about the telescope. So that was terrible. What is your favourite RSPB reserves? Which ones have you really liked?
As an RSPB Youth Council member, I've only visited two. There's a new one called RSPB Franchises Lodge, and there's one in the north of England, in North Yorkshire, called RSPB Saltholm, which opened a few months ago, actually, and that's in Middlesbrough. But probably my most favourite is either Raynham Marshes on the very edge of East London, or any reserve in Norfolk, so that could be Titchwell or Snettisham.
Okay, we're slightly losing your voice there. I hope everyone can hear what Kabir is saying. I personally, in terms of RSPB reserves, my overall favourite is quite an unusual shout for an urban birder, but I absolutely adore Leica Heath. Yeah, I adore it because I remember going, there in the mornings, and it's just a beautiful vista. And it kind of reminds me of a fragment of the habitat you'll find in Eastern Europe. Just a tiny fragment of it. It's beautiful. The Saltholm RSPB Reserve is also a big favourite of mine. It's very urban in Middlesbrough, and the skyline there. There's the skyline in Saltholm, when you're actually at Saltholm RSPB. Is industrial. It's full of these pipes. I think it's a gasworks or something. There's pipes with flames coming out the top and all that sort of stuff. Did you know there's a film called Blade Runner? Okay, do you know about Blade Runner?
I haven't watched any of the films.
But you know about Blade Runner because basically it's directed by a guy called Ridley Scott, and Ridley Scott based the skyline in Blade Runner on the skyline to be seen from Saltholm. Do you know that? So a bit of movie trivia for you there. What other organisations are you involved with?
By the way, he also filmed some of it at Deeside, I think, near Flintshire, near Wales. There was a part on Winter Watch about it. So I'm also a Cameron Bespolka Trust ambassador. The Cameron Bespolka Trust. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, can everyone hear? I mean, I'm just going to go gallery view for a minute. Can you just show me a sign that you can hear? Wave your hands, flick your fingers. Yeah, good. Okay, we're back to where we were. Okay, so you were saying?
So yeah, I'm an ambassador for the Cameron Bespolka Trust. Now, the Cameron Bespolka Trust is a charity set up about 4 years ago to get children outside, particularly teenagers, into nature, immerse them in the natural world as much as possible. And they do that by giving them new opportunities. For example, wildlife camps where they go out for 2 or 3 days. Those really influenced me and actually gave me the confidence to continue with the map. And they also hold scholarships. So every year, a young person gets to go to the Cornell lab in America for a week and learn about ornithology, which is fabulous. And they give all these new opportunities. And funnily enough, in the place which I went to, Franchises Lodge, with the RSPB as a youth council member, the Cameron Bespolka Trust is actually doing a project there with renovating an old cottage called Cameron's Cottage into a field centre. So the cottage will become accommodation, and around it there'll be a field centre where there'll be workshops held for identification, for using optics, and also surveying too. And it'll bring students from around the UK and the local area as well, and encourage them to explore and hopefully bring their passion for nature through, which is fabulous. But as a Cameron Bespoker Trust ambassador. Ambassadors have to spread the word of the trust mainly to their age group, because I've done that through a wildlife society at school. But I find that with teenagers, it's the hardest age group to get involved and develop a new interest. So I think just guiding them gently through and getting them to notice all the wildlife around them just gradually will boost their mental health, and it'll do the trick and help them enjoy the natural world around them.
Okay, we're going to talk about how you engage youth in a minute, but let's go back a bit, because obviously, again, people may not understand or know where you come from in terms of your interests. So can you just quickly tell us what happened to the even younger Kabir, when he suddenly saw the light, which from behind the light was a bird, or, how did you get into it?
Okay, so I was probably about 2, and I walked into the living room. And this is at the time when Planet Earth had just been released, and I saw my grandma watching Planet Earth on the TV. And I was really enchanted by all these different animals just appearing before me on the screen. And I really felt a connection with what David Attenborough was saying later on, not when I was 2, but just seeing the animals on the screen. It really brought out my curiosity, and I wanted to explore more. So when I was about 7, I didn't really know much about the wildlife in Britain. So I just happened to look out of the window and see all these pigeons and sparrows, predominantly birds. And that's how I got into birding. Afterwards, I got binoculars, a field guide, started to explore the local area. And then I just became a birder, really.
Did you have a mentor? Did you have, as a child, getting interested in birds, did you have someone to teach you, or did you teach yourself?
I really just found a field guide and just learned from there. And I looked at RSPB videos, the RSPB website, to see how I could improve my garden. That was about it. And I also got a book. One of my first nature books was called The Complete Naturalist by Nick Baker. And it taught you all these different skills on how to be a naturalist. And they were very easy. And I tried some of them. And one of them, which I was really keen to try out. I still haven't tried it out today, but it was a pitfall trap. So I found this huge drum in the conservatory, and I wanted to bury it underground, and in the hopes of one day a weasel or something getting trapped. But no, I wasn't allowed.
I'm not surprised. Are your family interested in wildlife?
Yes, they are now. My mum is really enthusiastic about wildlife, especially on our doorstep, and I can see my mum really interacting and enjoying feeding the birds, and as the RSPB say, giving nature a home on our doorstep. And I think the lockdown has really influenced her to go outside and enjoy the wildlife on our doorstep. And my brother and my dad as well are getting involved too, which is really nice.
That's fantastic. And I also know that your family love going to, in particular, Norfolk.
Yes.
Norfolk. Why is that?
Well, my mum especially loves the noise of the pink feet at Snettisham every year. And they come in their thousands, and they migrate to the reservoirs and lakes nearby. And it's a magical sound. It really is. I mean, it might just sound a bit of a cacophony to some people, but others, it's magical. It's like seeing swifts return every year, but in winter.
Okay, because just for those people listening elsewhere outside of the UK, the pinkfoot is a goose. I think that's a pinkfoot there. Yeah, it's a goose. So just for those who didn't know, well, that's cool. So basically, you grew up, you got interested in nature. So how did your peers, how did the kids in your school greet you or treat you with your interest in birds? Were you accepted? Were you ridiculed? How did it work?
Well, I can say both, really. And up till very recently, the ridiculing still happened, and continues from time to time, but only recently do I know how to deal with it. When I came to secondary school in year 7, I soon found I was very different in my interests to others and in my hobbies, because no one really, figuratively speaking, spoke my language. And it was hard to find someone else who was interested in the natural world. But when I started a wildlife society a couple of years back, with the help of some of my teachers, it really brought out the curiosity in students. And they wanted to learn about the natural world, and they were curious, and now they're all interested in wildlife too. So only by giving them the knowledge, and educating them about the wildlife in school and how they can make a difference, will they appreciate and learn to love the nature in their local area. And by doing so, I've noticed that all of my friends are interested. Fabulous.
Well, that's good. When I was a kid, when I was your age, I had a very, very big interest in birds. I taught myself natural history generally. Actually, I got interested in insects first. I got interested in birds, but I didn't have. Some of the kids were very severe with me in terms of my interest, and in the end, I actually started to kind of hold it down a bit and not make it so obvious, because I wasn't, you know, like you, I was a bit of an outsider in that respect. So that was tough. So, okay, how do you now convince other kids of your age of the benefits of being involved with nature, you know, the benefits of caring for the environment?
Well, I've mainly been doing this in school for now, but hopefully I will go outside and try and encourage more young people. Before the lockdown, I was going to do some workshops around London to try and encourage young people, but it's mainly been in school at the moment. So we put up posters around school just advertising different talks, and children from all year groups do come along, not just my friends. And just by putting up pictures and visuals, they seem curious and quite excited to learn about, for example, if it's birds in the Middle East or reptiles in the UK. And people at first don't consider reptiles to be in the UK. They don't they don't put the two together. But when you actually do a presentation in school, then they get really excited. But most of all, when you go outside and take them outside to see the real thing, that's when they feel that special connection with nature, that they're seeing the real thing and developing their passion.
So you lead groups then when you're at school, you take your schoolmates around and show them natural history?
Yeah, I mean, the society fell into a bit of a disorder because we didn't have any supervision. But I found, surprisingly, there are quite a few teachers who are interested in the natural world. And we found a permanent supervision for our society, which is really good. And with the help of him, I've been leading walks around the school. We surveyed for the Big Schools Birdwatch, and we found quite a few species: redwing, dunnock, house sparrow, uh, lesser black-backed gull. So loads of species about, and the school hadn't really been surveyed for wildlife at all. And when we returned after the lockdown, I'm working with my biology department to uh, improve biodiversity in the school. So we're going to build a pond, an outdoor classroom, and an allotment too. It's really exciting.
Fantastic. So tell me about this interactive map that you put together and you spent 18 months putting together. What possessed you to do that? And what is it?
Well, firstly, 4 years ago, when I first started watching wildlife in the capital, I only knew my local area at this point. I wanted to go further afield because my passion for urban nature had just developed. I thought there'd be a map of sites to visit. It turns out there were, but only of those mapped by certain organizations. And no one seemed to be looking at the bigger picture of London as a whole. What I like to call London's wild side is the patchwork of green and blue spaces. 47% of London is green and blue spaces. Now, I only plotted the nature reserves I knew, the ones I had from memory, and that was a problem. So after a while, I launched it as Nature Reserves of London First Edition. That wasn't very successful, as you can imagine, because it didn't have the data sufficient for the map, a complete map. And after I went to bird camp, and at this point I had just completely deemed it pointless and given up on it, it gave me the confidence and motivation after meeting like-minded people. I didn't feel so alone because people were doing inspiring things for their community. It gave me the motivation to go ahead, press on, and continue to make this map. And in 18 months, I finished the current version of the map, Nature Reserves of London. I'm not going to go into the different types of designations, but after compiling that all together, surprisingly, it became very popular. It's not actually a map of green spaces. It's a map of designated wildlife sites. So those designated by the government and borough councils to protect wildlife and to maintain the coexistence between people and wildlife. And now I'm trying to develop it into an app with the help of different organizations, because at this point in time, the map in its services for people is a bit primitive. So it can achieve so much more. So we're going to give a lot more, we want to give a lot more opportunities to Londoners to explore the wild side of London.
Fantastic. Now let's place you in London. Whereabouts are you? Because, you know, again, people may not know your position inside London. Where are you?
I'm in Hillingdon in North London.
Okay, so that's Ruislip Way, I take it.
Yes.
Tell us about your local patches.
So my patch is Ruislip Woods. Now, it's the largest continuous woodland in London. I'm very, very lucky to have it as my patch. It's one of London's 3 national nature reserves. That's a designation which ensures that the nature reserve is of nationwide importance because of the amount of species it has. Its ecological importance is huge to the UK. It's divided into 4 different woods, and in the centre, there's also a few meadows and scrubland here and there. And in the centre, there is a huge lake called Lido. This was a former swimming area, outdoor swimming pool, but it's now been designated as a wildlife site, and there's lots of wildlife there, especially birds and wildfowl. And I remember when I visited your patch, David, Wormwood Scrubs, and you were showing me and telling me all these different stories of birds you've seen, and, for example, waders that have grazed on playing fields which don't have water. I thought, as we speak, something might be happening like that now, and I haven't really been bothered to go around my patch because I've been to so many other places around London, and I've completely forgotten about my local area, which is a huge problem because Ruislip Woods is underwatched, and I need to appreciate and record the wildlife on my doorstep and in my patch. Not many people see the ecological importance of Ruislip Woods at all, which is another big problem. And I want to, after the lockdown, just explore and make the most of the huge opportunities I have right on my doorstep.
Now, it's very important to cover your local patch. I mean, I think, you know, Ruislip Woods, Madbest Woods, you know, Ruislip Lido, they've all been underwatched for decades. I mean, I went to your patch maybe 15, 20 years ago, and even then it was really not known that well. Really? And look back in the London Bird Report records, you'll see the occasional interesting birds from that area, like wood warbler and, you know, red starts and bullfinch and all that sort of stuff. They're probably there all the time. It's just that no one's there to record it. And I think, you know, like, for example, Wormwood Scrubs, you mentioned my local patch. It's really important for me because I was going there for 20 odd years. And when I first started going there, people were saying to me, "What are you doing going there? You should go somewhere proper to go bird watching." And I was thinking, no. And when migration season happened and everyone's rushing off to headlands and famous nature reserves, I'll head inland in a city to my local patch. And it's incredible because you see a microcosm of migration. You see, and you eventually find that, you know, your patch may have important numbers of birds breeding. You know, my patch, Wormwood Scrubs, song thrush and linnet, very important. So it's, you know, that's good to, once you get out lockdown, you should really try and to get back to your patch. But saying that, I mean, there's obviously, London's a big place. Well, what other places within London would you like to go birding or looking for nature, for wildlife?
Well, my very, very long-term goal is to visit all the designated sites in London. But that's going to be a problem because sites gain and lose designation over time. But I think I want to visit these railside reserves in Lewisham. In Lewisham, there is a huge wildlife corridor. It's the remnants of an ancient woodland called the Great North Wood. It's got one or two London Wildlife Trust sites, a local nature reserve, and quite a few community-run nature reserves too. And I haven't visited much of it. I've visited maybe one or two sites, but I'd love to explore and discover more down there especially, and also go to a place called the South London Downs. There are quite a few places which I want to go to. The South London Downs is on the edge, the very edge of London, near Croydon, and it's an area of rare habitat called chalk downland, where you've got these spectacular wildflower meadows, and I'd love to visit there. There are so many sites, but I'd be saying so much. I could say so many sites that I wanted to visit, but those are the few that I want to visit.
Well, Kabir, I can see a book in this. I think you should visit these sites and actually write about them, because the last time a book was written about birds, where to go to see birds in London, was back in the early 90s, and it's called Where to Watch Birds in London, and that's sorely out of date. You know, it needs updating big time. So maybe that's a project for you to get involved with in the future. Now, obviously you love London, and we'll talk about you personally and your heritage in a minute, but do you love London? Do you go to other cities? Are you strictly urban, or do you like going in the middle of nowhere? I mean, I know you mentioned going to North Norfolk, but do you go to other places as well?
I do go abroad every year. So I do go to the United Arab Emirates and visit my grandparents, and most of my family live there. So I visit the UAE every year. There are two Emirates which I visit. The first is Sharjah. Sharjah is a city which is near Dubai, and it has quite a lot of wildlife. There's this huge reservoir called Al Wasat Reservoir. It's a wetland center that's just opened a few years back, and it's as well as almost like a wildlife sanctuary for UAE birds. It's got huge scrubland with chestnut-bellied sand grouse, black-winged stilt, a few flamingos here and there, and there's another one in the neighboring emirate of Ajman called Al Zora. But unfortunately, there's quite a bit of development around. The site's still being preserved, but it's very inaccessible. But you can see it through the perimeter fence. You can see it from the car park, where the car park of the main development too. But probably what I consider to be my UAE patch is Ras Al Khor. Ras Al Khor is a huge salt marsh in the middle of Dubai, not too far from the Burj Khalifa at all. And there's hundreds of flamingos. I'd suggest you get there early, because it becomes packed with tourists throughout the day wanting to get a glimpse of the flamingos. But there's a lot more than just that sea of pink you see every time you visit. There's so many wader species. I could be here all day naming the species of wader you find there. There are so many different species of wader. You've got ospreys circling overhead too, and a few western reef herons too. And I've got one of my favorite sightings from Ras Al Khor is a great white pelican. It was the 10th record for the UAE, and I feel really, it was really special to see it.
Fantastic. So your family's from the UAE, United Arab Emirates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you a question, which could be a bit sensitive, but I think it's important to ask this question. Relating back to myself, I'm a black guy of Jamaican descent, and I've been birding all my life. And I've never, in terms of when I'm out in nature and also talking and dealing with people like birders, only once have I ever had any kind of racial issue, racial discrimination. I've had racial discrimination totally outside of my life within the environment, but not outside. Sorry, not within, should I say, but outside. The question I want to ask you is, do you think, because what's been touted a lot on the internet, I've noticed, is the fact that in UK anyway, people of colour, for want of a better phrase, are sort of barred or feel they can't get involved in nature because of racism. And I've thought about that, and I just don't see it, because as much as you could possibly say that some of the NGOs might have some kind of situation where it may come across that it's institutionally racist in terms of the people they employ. I don't know. That's another subject. But in terms of people, like us, I've never felt any kind of barrier whatsoever. And I feel, we had in conservation with a couple of weeks ago with Jason Ward, who's a really great American conservationist. He's Afro-American, and he was talking about, that there are situations there. And I think someone who's actually might even be here today was mentioning that she took a group of Asian people up to Northern England somewhere, and they were apprehensive, thinking that they were going to be racially abused. And as it happened, nothing happened at all. I really fear that this kind of, talk of being racially abused and, facing racism when you're in nature stops people from being involved. That's the main problem, not racism, it's the actual thought of it. What are your views? I know that you're not, you're not out there campaigning for certain things, but what's your view?
Well, actually, my family have been living in the UAE for some time, but I'm of Indian descent. My grandfather came here in the 1950s, and even then, if you were to get interested in nature, they would still be very, very welcoming, because I haven't experienced any racism whatsoever. And even then, I don't think there would be much racism within the wildlife community. Everyone's been very welcoming to me. Times may have been different back then, but still, the interest is the same, really. So I feel that there isn't much racism at all nowadays. But in terms of access to nature, I don't believe that different families, I don't believe it's different ethnicities as such. That it could be reflected in the culture or tradition. But what I do feel is that individual families, their mentality, they may not have been brought up that way. They may have not noticed the nature around them. And that's possibly why some children may not be able to go outside, or they may not even have had the thought of going outside and appreciating nature. So as well as children, I think it's adults we need to talk to as well, and we need to influence them to go outside and into nature. And once they've got that mentality of the natural world boosting their mental health and benefiting them in their everyday lives, they can therefore pass it down to their children. And for example, take them down the local green space or park for a walk, and point out the common species or trees, birds, birdsong, tell them to notice and think of their surroundings in a different way. So I don't think it's racism whatsoever. I think it's attitudes, certain attitudes and mentalities too, that need to be changed. Generally, just with individual families.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, and I think it's exacerbated by the fact, I believe, that the media in this country, in the UK, often portray nature as a white middle class pursuit. You turn on your TV, and unfortunately, the presenter you see is predominantly male, white, and middle class. And I feel that people regardless of color, creed, or religion, what have you, to look at this, people living in the cities look at this and basically sort of think, well, that's not me. And that could also be a thing. So I think the media have to really work harder to show that nature is accessible for everyone. I think there should be more programs about urban nature for a start, personally. We've got some sort of comments here. Fran says, but white middle class bird types or birders, I suppose, are just more subtle about their racism. Surely the proportion of racism is the same. What do you think?
Not at all. No, there's an extremely small minority there that may be racist, but if at all, really, if at all. But I found the majority of anyone, really, no one in the birding community is racist at all, to be honest. I haven't had any experience myself with racism in the birding community, so I don't think so, really. They're not hiding their racism. They don't. They're very, very welcoming. And if they walk into a hide, they don't. If you walk into a hide and see another birder, um, and you ask them what's about or what have you seen today, as I have just going into a hide every now and then, they won't judge you by uh, what your skin color is or what your race is. They'll just think of you as a fellow birder or someone who's interested in the same passion.
Right, Zoomers, people out there listening and watching, anyone like to add to this? Any questions or statements?
I'd like to say something, and I tend to, although I might not know birding very much. Oops, enlarging that. I'm getting into this, new to the birding world, but I think when you're the only, as I have been, either the only black one or the only female, and by and large you don't have a problem. It's kind of safe to say it's not an issue. I've never had that problem, but when it's only you, that's fine. I suspect if groups of young urban black or Asian or young people of colour decided, well, we want to go to the countryside and we want to join this group regularly, there might be some other issues that raise their head that might surprise us all, coming from the people that we thought we knew. So I think it's great if it hasn't happened to you, but I think it's worthwhile remembering that you're the one and the only one. If there were a lot more of you, it might change a bit. And that's speaking as someone who's been like you, the one, either the only black person or the only woman or the only black female. I've spent my whole life being in environments like that. And I am very aware of the subtleties of the code that racism sometimes comes in. So although I think, much like you and David, I've been fortunate, I do have to remember that when I've been in a group, my experience sometimes has been very different. That's all.
What were your thoughts, Kabir? Thank you, Oni. What are your thoughts?
Thank you. I think over time attitudes have changed, and I do have friends who are interested in wildlife and birds, who are from all backgrounds, and I've spoken to them, and we've had a similar conversations here and there, and we've all agreed that none of us whatsoever have experienced any kind of prejudice or racism in our passions. We're just seen as other birders who enjoy watching the wildlife around us. And if we go up and ask for help or to look through someone's scope, they'll happily do so. So I have not seen any problems, and neither have any of my friends. I think attitudes have changed over the years, and everyone has become more accepting and more friendly of each other over the years.
Nicole Jackson here says, within the fan unit of people of colour, there is a stigma around the interest in nature. Should definitely be normalised through media. Which is something I've discovered. I think a lot of people feel that it's not for them because there is no one else out there that looks like them. So that could be another issue there. Anyone else would like to make a comment or anything else? Okay. Moving on then. So talking about going to different cities, have you noticed any similarities between some of the other cities you've been to in London? Do you think to yourself, that's interesting, maybe I can bring that back to London and try talking about that or adding that to my repertoire in terms of trying to get people interested in nature?
Well, just depending on where I am, because I sometimes visit, so when I visit the UAE, I usually go out onto my grandparents' balcony and watch, and there are quite a lot of tall buildings around, and that's a great place to see raptors and things like that, and birds migrating. And when it's quite funny, when I'm in Bangkok sometimes, and my grandparents, when I stay with my grandparents there sometimes, I go onto the balcony there, and it's in the middle of the city. It's in central Bangkok, and I time my birding every day. So at dawn, I'll wake up at a certain time and see a certain building's lights turn on, and that's when I know the birds are going to migrate at that time. And for some reason, as soon as those lights turn on, I see stuff like Chinese pond herons, cattle egrets migrating, Asian openbills, huge storks migrating across the center of Bangkok. And a similar thing happens at dusk. I come outside and I see all these birds, and in the foliage around you get fantails and babblers and birds called monarchs as well. And then I see a certain building turn its lights on, and then I realize that's it. So I think it's really certain times of day. So at dawn and dusk, certain times at dawn of dusk, and that's something I've taken away when I've been on my birding trips, to time my trips to get the best experience.
What does it feel like to see a bird for you? What does it feel like when you're out in the environment?
Well, it depends what environment I'm in, really. I'm not the kind of person who's excited to add a new bird to a list as such. I'm not really a lister. I don't do year lists or anything like that. But whenever I see a new bird, I just feel very happy. My mental health is boosted, and if it's a new bird, then I do feel thrilled to see that bird. For example, I have a lockdown list. I'm sure many of you here do have a lockdown list. And I look out into my garden. I was just writing an article yesterday, and out of the corner of my eye, this bird started walking upside down in front of me. It was a nuthatch, the first nuthatch in my garden. And it really brought joy to me seeing that bird for the first time in my garden. So it really depends where I am and what the situation is. If it's lockdown, if I'm really bored at one point, I've nothing to do, and I just see a bird fly in front of me, it gives me hope, and that and it just boosts my mental health, really.
I remember being with you, was it last December? We were in Walthamstow Wetlands in
Last October,
London,
yes.
and we saw a brambling, which is this bird.
Yes, the brambling, yes.
And you were elated. That was was it your first one?
My first one ever.
You acted like any other bird award. You became very elated.
It's always great to see a new bird.
It certainly is. Okay, so what have you got planned? What's your plans, for the next few years? What do you want to achieve?
Well, for now, it's really just developing the app and trying to get all these ideas. We haven't actually gone into the stages of actually making the app itself. We're in the stages of compiling ideas, generating ideas as a partnership. So a group of organizations that we're all working together. And I need to get things moving because I haven't really done anything. So I've gotten everyone together, but the ideas have just been sitting there and not being put into action. But once they're put into action and people are interacting, then something has started. But for now, I think I'm going to, there's a lot more that needs to be done in London, especially at this point in time too. So I will keep campaigning and to protect the wild side of London, and go outside, bird watch more, go to my patch as well more, and see, because there could be many hidden surprises out there. There's Bluebell Woods and Ricewood Woods, and they're all recorded, but I don't think anyone actually goes to see them every year. So that's something else that could be echoed throughout. There could be so many different surprises, but no one's really seen them. So I really need to explore my patch more, especially.
I know that you're very active when it comes to environmental conservation, and there's one terrible thing happening at the moment, which has been going on behind our backs whilst we're all in lockdown, and that's the development of the high-speed railway, the HS2, and the damage it's going to do to some of our, ancient woodlands. Tell us about your campaigning work. So
HS2 is this railway that's going through, connecting London. It's in its first phase, so they want to connect it from London to Birmingham, at this point in time. But what's really sad is it goes through 108 ancient woodlands. And as we speak, they are felling trees in Warwickshire, ancient trees, thousands, over 1,000-year-old trees. And just down the road from me in the Colne Valley, which is a huge ecological asset of London's, and another area which is quite underwatched. And I did, up till very recently, I was the surveyor of this huge lake called Broadwater Lake. So I count all the wetland birds, all the birds that were sitting on the lake. And I get some surprises like goldeneye every year and a pair of red-breasted merganser. That was quite exciting. But as we speak, that reserve is closed, as are many reserves across the Colne Valley and through West London to places in Euston, and also your patch too, David, Wormwood Scrubs, are all being indirectly affected, which is heartbreaking because London is so ecologically biodiverse. And in the Colne Valley, that's where the most damage is being done. They want to build a viaduct over Broadwater Lake, where I used to survey the wildlife there. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. It's basically just a vanity project. They're not doing it without any thought or consideration for the wildlife and the ecological value of the UK. They're disrupting the ecological value of the country, which is horrifying. But I really hope these works are halted and the importance of these habitats, especially, and the wildlife that thrives in it, is recognized as soon as possible.
I mean, it's all for the sake of shaving 20 minutes off the time of getting to a train from London to Birmingham, which I think is such a ridiculous reason, because you're also banking on the train running on time in the first place. It's just ridiculous. I mean, on my patch, you know, we've been fighting this whole development thing for some time. And the previous mayor, who's now our Prime Minister, he was a bit of a shapeshifter in that he would, in the last minute, send out these notices to people's residences saying, we're going to be doing this Wormwood Scrubs, but not give you enough time to react. Or they do it when people are on holiday during the summer. It's really devious. And they wanted to make a kind of Manhattan meets Croydon skyline to the north of the site, and shave off one corner to put some stuff to do with railway there. And the HS2 people want to come along and they try and hoodwink you by saying, oh, but we'll put everything back as it was before. And we'll build you a lake and we'll do this for you and we'll do this management. But when you look at the plans, it's like Disneyland. They've got this horrible signs and areas that they think it's going to be really great for people, when in reality, they should just leave it alone and just, get away, basically. So it's really, as you say, I mean, a lot of people here have said on the chat here that they're very heartbroken with all the stuff that's going on. It's terrible. But what is your vision? What vision would you want for London, in the next 10 years?
By the way, is that development Old Oak Common, where they're building the skyscrapers?
Yes.
Okay. I really hope it's put to an end soon.
Anyway, what's your vision for London? What's your overall vision?
Well, my overall vision is really to do with knowledge. Because knowledge is really can be really powerful when it comes to wildlife and nature conservation for ordinary people, not just conservationists and those interested in nature. Everyone can play their part. That's my dream for London, that people are educated about how they can make a difference on their doorstep for their city too, and how they can notice and appreciate the wildlife around us. I mean, London has got an official designation as the world's first ever national park city, and we really need to fulfill that designation. And just with HS2 around, it really juxtaposes that whole idea of making London greener and wilder, because it completely just defeats the purpose. So HS2 really just has to, we really need to just realize the importance of our habitats and end HS2, as well as at the same time as that being ended, we need ordinary people to realize the importance of the wildlife around them and how their perception can be changed with the capital, because some may be stuck at home and may just see in the inner city and may just think of it as noise, crowded spaces, pollution. But there's a completely different side to London, which I'll show you in a few minutes. And just by looking at and noticing and appreciating that different side to London, the wild side of London, as well as their mental health being boosted, they can pass on that passion to their children, perhaps, or their grandchildren, and their friends and family. They can do so much with that knowledge, and that knowledge can even lead to sustainable development, streets being rewilded. For example, there's this plan that is around social media of Fleet Street, was in the heart of the historic city of London, the financial centre of the capital. And you've got parklets in the middle of the roads, you've got hedgerows, you've got bird feeders, you've got climbing plants going down the sides of the cheese grater and the gherkin. That just looks like wildlife paradise, really. But we need everyone to realise the importance of that. We need everyone to think of that place as a wildlife paradise.
Well, that's good. You are a very eloquent young man at 14 years old, cusping onto 15. It's fantastic to hear your views now, and I'm sure you look back at this interview and others you've done at your age now and think, be proud of yourself. But this is the one time I can actually say this without I'm being actually correct. What are you going to do when you grow up?
Just continue as I am, really, explore around London, but eventually I will need to branch out and explore other cities around the world. But my heart, my conservation will always be in London. My heart will always be in London, really. And I will come back and try and improve it as much as possible for its wildlife. And I'll keep on campaigning and doing whatever it takes, really, to encourage everyone to see the wild side of London. And hopefully, I'd like to be a broadcaster too, so I can spread more awareness and travel around, perhaps even the world, and explore so many more different habitats and species around the world. And I'm really excited for the future.
Yeah, I'm excited for your future too, and I share your love of London. London is the city of my birth, and it's my favourite city in the whole planet. Despite the fact I travel all over the world, I always think of London. So I share that. I think this could be the point where you can show us some images of London.
Okay, so I'd just like to show you a few images that I've taken over a few years. Hopefully this will show a completely different side to London. Oh, and by the way, this is the view from Russell Khor.
Where's that?
In Dubai. This is my UAE patch. See, the Burj Khalifa is right here, and you've got so much swamp and mangrove forest around here, and this is just a wildlife. This is a gem in the middle of downtown Dubai. So yeah, I'll show you a few photos now. So I'd just like to show you a few photos of London's habitats. So this first one is not too far from me. It's in the Colne Valley, as we mentioned earlier. This is Denham Loch. It gives its name to London Wildlife Trust Nature Reserve, which is called Denham Loch Wood. And it's a site, and also there's another rare habitat called Frey's Farm Meadows, which is just over this hedgerow to the right. And this supports a variety of wildlife. It's a wet meadow and wet habitat. This is a canal. Canals are great habitats in the capital. You've got the Grand Union Canal, the Hertford Union Canal, the Regent's Canal, which is quite famous too. And this is in Harefield, the westernmost town in London. This is Rainham Marshes. This is the RSPB's Nature Reserve in London. This is their headquarters for whatever activity they do in London. This is on the very border of the Thames estuary, a huge haven for wildlife. This is more of an estuarine, marshy habitat. As you can see in the foreground, you've got widgeon, shoveler, teal, gadwall, and in the background, you've got lapwing too. So these meadows flood every now and then, and I've seen barn owl here too. It supports a huge variety of wetland species, and not just birds, uh, mammals, reptiles, and insects too. This is Waltham. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is Walthamstow Wetlands, and it's a great nature reserve. It's Europe's largest urban wetland. And what I love about this picture is that you can see, if you look very carefully in the background on the left, you can see Canary Wharf, and in the dead centre, in the very distance, you can see the Shard and the City of London. This isn't too far from central London whatsoever. And this is the north side of the reserve. The north side is probably one of my most favourite parts of Walthamstow Wetlands. And a nature reserve generally in London, this is one of my favourites because you can just see open reservoirs. It almost feels like endless water, almost like the sea when it's windy. And you get kestrels and the screeching of peregrines and swifts overhead. And in the trees, as David, we've seen, and in the grass around, there's sometimes migrants like brambling and also residence birds like goldfinches that congregate in the trees, and long-tailed tits too. But there's such a variety, a plethora of species that benefits from these reservoirs, which look kind of barren when you first look at them. But when you actually visit the site, you'll see the true scale, the true measure of how much biodiversity it really supports. It's absolutely remarkable. This here is the Leamouth Peninsula. It's not too far from a place called East India Dock Basin. That's an old dock in Docklands in Canary Wharf in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. This is more of not a marshy habitat, more of a mudflat kind of habitat. This is the mouth of the River Lee, which is arguably London's second most important river after the famous Thames, and it's a huge ecological asset for London because it's the lifeblood really of the Lee Valley, a huge collection of sites of wetland habitats with loads of wildlife. This is the very edge of that conurbation really of wildlife sites. It's called the Bow Creek Ecology Park. This is when the River Lee becomes the Bow Creek. And if you look closely, not in this photo, but when you visit, you can see gulls, redshank too, just dwelling in front of this huge new neighborhood called the Leamouth Peninsula. And that just shows urban wildlife at its best, how remarkably it has adapted. And that is what I find fascinating. And that's what really got me into urban wildlife. It was seeing things like bitterns and peregrines in the heart of London and realizing their adaptations and how they survive and how the city really benefits them. This is a fabulous bluebell wood, which I'm lucky enough to have on my doorstep. It's called Gutteridge Wood. It's a wildlife site in Hillingdon. And this beautiful bluebell wood is a sign of, if you see it, it's a sign of you walking through an ancient woodland, trees which are, i.e., over 200 or 300 years old. And these beautiful wildflowers can be seen springing up around March to about May. So right now, as I'm speaking, the bluebells are still thriving at Gutteridge Wood. It's an endless carpet of bluebells. And what I love about all of these places is that they're in London. I cannot, firstly, when you visit these sites, you cannot believe that you're still in the capital. It's a completely different perspective, which I think everyone should recognize. That's on their very doorstep. This is, as I've mentioned before, this is Frey's Farm Meadows, a lovely wet meadow. When it rains, it supports a huge variety of species like, especially two wader species, snipe and lapwing. And along the Freys River, which is another important part of the Colne Valley, there are many different warblers and bunting species. Well, you've got reed bunting, many different warbler species, and in the wet woodland behind, which is those trees surrounding the far left of the picture, you've got willow tit, which is a common species, not a common species in London, but it favours wet woodland habitat like Denham Lock Wood and Fraser Farm Meadows. This here is a park in Wimbledon, South Park Gardens. And yes, at first look, it may look like this very bustling, busy park. But if you look to your left, there is a birder. And that is because on that day, I went to see, this is probably one of my most favourite birds I've seen in London. This is what, well, actually, no, I don't really have a favourite, but this is probably one of my most memorable trips to see an uncommon or / rare bird in London. Waxwings. There were a flock of waxwings in Wimbledon sitting high in the tree on the right. And it was fabulous. It was my first waxwings. I've seen so many birds in London alone, probably more than anywhere else in the world, because London is such a biodiverse area. And these are a beautiful sight. And finally, this is the Barbican Wildlife Garden in the historic city of London, I might have mentioned earlier. This is the Barbican Wildlife Garden. It's probably one of my most favourite community gardens in the whole of London. The volunteers and their dedication is absolutely superb because their hard work has paid off. They've got peregrines, kestrels, sparrowhawks, great spotted woodpeckers, fully functioning bird hide in which you can record your sightings, a library there, ponds with huge numbers of frogs every year, dragonflies, damselflies, so many species. This is almost like a paradise, like a gem for nature conservation in London. And I think because of this garden alone, house sparrow species in the city of London has really skyrocketed because of the beautiful habitats around. And to the pictures left, you can see a whole variety of wildflowers. This has a spectacular wildflower meadow in summer, which benefits the whole variety of species, bees, butterflies, birds, so many different species. And it's remarkable building. You're in the historic city, London's beginnings, if you'd like to put it that way. And you see this wildflower meadow flourishing, a great example to us all in London, really. So those are habitats of London that I wanted to share with you all of them because there are so many of them in London. But that's just an idea if you want to get outside and explore and around in London.
Kabir, your enthusiasm is totally and utterly infectious, and I am in lockdown in Spain. I feel like walking all the way back to London, swimming the channel to come back to see some places again. So thank you for that. Let me ask you one question. What's your favourite bird?
Kingfisher, no doubt, it's a kingfisher. I love its vibrant colours, and just it's like a flash of blue and gold when it flies past. It really makes your day.
And if you could be anywhere on this planet, notwithstanding the current pandemic, where would you be?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Not necessarily London, actually. I would be possibly in Bangkok or the UAE or in Saltholm or Lakenheath. Any reserve, really. I just want to get outside, and my patch as well. I want to be on my patch.
Fantastic. We've come more or less to the close of this session of this episode of In Conservation With. If you've got a last minute question, now's your chance. I'm giving you 10 seconds to wave your hand. Okay. Well, coming up, we've got 3 more In Conservation episodes to come. So tomorrow we've got Tony Juniper, who is he's basically the chief of English Nature, the head of English Nature, and that may be a bit of a controversial one because he's going to be here talking about some of the things that the English Nature have done recently that have, for other conservationists, have found quite alarming, but maybe, he will explain why those decisions were made. That could be quite interesting tomorrow. On Sunday, we've got Lars Johnson, who is an amazing artist from Sweden. He is a giant amongst artists. He's about 15 feet tall. I love him. He's an amazing artist. And finally, on Sunday, we got Monday, we have Jonathan Mayrev, who's from Israel, and he'll be talking about Champions of the Flyway, the competition run every year for charities to get money raised for important issues around the world. So I think I got to the point where we say goodbye to Kabir. So I'd like to thank you very much for being here. I hope you enjoyed your time.
I really enjoyed my time. Thank you so much, David. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure having you, and I'm sure all the other Zoomers here would agree with me. Take care, everyone. I hope to see you over the next couple of days. And by the way, one other thing to say, when I take a break next week, and we're back on the 18th of May, and we're going to have a travel week. And the first day, Monday, the 18th of May, we're going to have an travel expert here talking about the potential for travel post coronavirus. So that could be quite an interesting conversation. So until then, look after yourself, keep safe, and don't forget to keep looking up. And I'll see you all soon. Take care.